My brothers and sisters in Christ, I'm Pastor Malcolm Guyman. I'm the senior servant leader at St. Paul AME Church in Philadelphia, the place where people meet purpose. I want to invite you to our Sunday Worship Rewind. If you missed our Sunday worship broadcast virtually, you missed a treat as God truly showed up and showed out in the place. I preached our second sermon in the series, Many Rivers to Cross, which chronicles the title of that series, the journey that the enslaved Africans had to take in order to make their way north to freedom. It's even named for a song, and a songwriter even used it, a Jamaican songwriter, to chronicle his journey from enslavement to freedom. And now here we are in the month of February using that Many Rivers to Cross as a segue to talk about the children of Israel and the journey that they took from bondage in slavery to freedom and the promised land. And so for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking about the children of Israel and the rivers that even now, today in 2021, we have to cross. And so here's this Sunday's Worship Rewind. I want to begin our sermon series, our Black History Month series, entitled Many Rivers to Cross. Many Rivers to Cross. Won't you join me in the book of Exodus, the 4th chapter, beginning at the 1st through the 17th verse. Exodus, the 4th chapter, beginning at the 1st through the 17th verse. Our sermon series, Many Rivers to Cross, chronicles the 1969 song by Jimmy Cliff. Jimmy Cliff was a Jamaican-born singer and songwriter who, in his song, Many Rivers to Cross, talks about his journey from Jamaica to the United Kingdom in search of a better life. But Jimmy Cliff talks about all of these different rivers that he has to cross, and really is talking about how he goes from the United Kingdom to Paris and to Germany, and each time crossing a river, he finds a very different experience, and with all of those experiences, he is also trying to find some identity and a place to belong. Later on, the song is used to reflect and to talk about the same challenges that enslaved Africans experienced in the antebellum South when they were trying to escape bondage and enslavement and make their way to the North. And the conversation was similar, that there were so many rivers to cross, and that when the enslaved Africans finally reached the North and finally reached freedom, that they talked about how often in times they had to cross this river or this creek or this plateau or this piece. And so there were so many different times that they said that every time they crossed one river, just when they got dry and their clothes would dry, they found another creek or another river that they had to cross to get to freedom. And that the struggle for them was that they barely could keep their health together because they were always crossing a river and traveling at night, and the cold water really their bodies took a beating. But in a most recent PBS special, the discussion or the question was raised, are we still crossing rivers? That while they had many rivers to cross, that in fact, people of African descent, people of color, black people and brown people are still crossing rivers. That there's still things that we're struggling with. There's still things that we find that are challenging us as a people, as a culture, and as a community. And so sometimes, if we are not careful, we can become frustrated because there are so many rivers to cross. But I've got good news for you, and in this month, we're going to talk about the children of Israel, and we're going to remind you that God is a God of deliverance. We're going to remind you that God is a God of freedom, and that even when you find yourself in bondage, God can and will free you of that which is holding you back. And so come on, let's look at Exodus, the 4th chapter and the 1st verse. Exodus, the 4th chapter and the 1st verse. We pick up on Moses' conversation with God after God has talked to him from the burning bush. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say the Lord did not appear to you?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. "Now put it back into your cloak," he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground." Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth, and I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform signs with it." The word of God for the people of God. In our text, we see something very interesting that reminds me of one of my favorite events as a child growing up in school. When I was younger, every Friday we had show and tell. And that's what I want to talk about just for a few minutes today. I want to talk from the topic show and tell. Now, God, remove me, replace me with your spirit of love, care, and understanding. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. And the family of God said together, amen. Show and tell was my favorite event in school when I was a kid growing up. I would take all week trying to figure out what cool toy I was going to take to school on Friday for show and tell. I knew pretty much what all of my classmates had. I knew pretty much all of the toys they had, and I got slick because there were some things I wouldn't tell them about because I could not wait for them to be excited and amazed at what I was bringing in for show and tell on Friday. I'm not sure what I liked most about it. I don't know if I liked the fact that I was able to stand up and explain and show people and tell them about my toy and how amazing it was, or if I was excited about the fact that during recess time we could take those toys outside and play with them with our friends. But either way, I knew I loved show and tell. I even remember my favorite show and tell toy. I had Kit, the Knight Rider car that I took to school. I was so excited because I had Michael Knight figure in the car. Come on, some of y'all, I'm going back old school now. Some of y'all don't remember Knight Rider, but I had the Knight Rider car, and it had the lights that went across the front, and it went. Oh, it was amazing. It even talked. The car talked, and it sounded just like Kit. I could not wait to get there on that Friday to show them and tell them about my toy. I enjoyed show and tell. Well, in our text, we see an interesting version of show and tell. Not like the one that we see in school, not like the one that I had when I was a kid. Our text drops in on the conclusion of a conversation that God has with Moses. You'll recall in the book of Exodus, in the beginning chapters of Exodus, it talks about where Moses comes from. It talks about how Moses gets to Egypt in the first place. And more importantly, it talks about some of the important events that leads him to this moment. But in chapter number 3, the conclusion of that chapter, God reveals himself to Moses through a burning bush. But I need to digress because I need you to understand that when I say a burning bush, I really mean a bush that was on fire. Because if you'll recall from that story, as God is speaking to Moses, the bush is burning and yet it is not consumed. The bush is on fire, yet it lasts long enough to have this conversation with Moses on what the bush and God refer to as holy ground, and it gives Moses the call to action. Through this burning bush, God tells Moses that you are going to be the one to go and deliver my people. Through this burning bush, God explains to Moses that I am going to use you to go and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And in chapter 4, we drop in on Moses' response to God. Come on, somebody. You've been in this predicament before where God has challenged you and called you to something specific, but you try to find each and every excuse as to why God must not have been talking to me. All right, that's fine. Y'all can act like you say yes as soon as God calls you if you want to. But can I be honest? Can I be the first person to raise my hand and say that there are some moments in my life where God calls me and tells me this is what I need you to do, and I try to give God plans B, C, D, and E that don't actually include me? Can I be honest and transparent with everybody and tell you that there have been some difficult decisions I've had to make in my life, some difficult moments in my personal and pastoral life, and I understand why Moses is having a difficult time with this, because what God is asking Moses to do is no easy task. What God is asking Moses to do requires him to stand up to the all-powerful Pharaoh. It requires him to go and stand boldly before Pharaoh, someone who can have him killed instantly, someone who could very well banish him forever. But not only that, Moses has the difficulty or the difficult task of having to tell Pharaoh to let my people go, and also having to convince enslaved Israelites that they are in fact enslaved. Can I pause for a minute and tell you that one of the frustrations I have with our society is that every time we feel like we have made some progress, every time we feel like we have made some success, just like the topic or the title of our series, we find that we have another river to cross. I understand how the enslaved Africans felt as they escaped the tyranny of the antebellum South and made their way north. Every time they made it through one situation, they encountered another. Every time they escaped the dogs, they encountered the bounty hunters. Every time they escaped the bounty hunters, they encountered a river. They encountered more dogs. I get it. It seemed like every time they made their way somewhere great, they had another river to cross. And the crossing rivers did not stop in the antebellum South. No, my brothers and sisters, even after a black president, how many of you know that we still have many rivers to cross? We still have some folk who are being killed simply because of the color of their skin in the street. We still have systematic racism. We still have bigotry. We still have people capturing and trying to capture the Capitol simply because black folk got too many rights and somebody's actually speaking out for them. But I need you to know that God is a God who will show and tell. Oh, well, come on, let's get back to our word. I digress. And so I understand Moses' frustration. Moses has to go and tell Pharaoh to let the people go and has to essentially tell him that your cheap labor is quitting because God said so. But Moses also has to convince the cheap labor that they are being oppressed. My God. God saved me from folk who don't know when they are being oppressed. God save me from the oppressed who don't understand that they are being oppressed. Can I tell you that one of the rivers we have to cross is that we have to reach back and let some folk know that, man, you are being oppressed. Woman, you are being oppressed. I know it's funny to call your sisters out of their names. I know it's funny to say that you support Trump when 90% of your financial capital came from black and brown children. I know it's funny to say to have a MAGA hat on and walk around like Jesus walks, but can I remind you, brother, that we are in a war here, and you need to know we're in a war, because if you don't know, heaven help us all, one of the rivers across is trying to liberate people who don't know they are in bondage. Again, I digress. I am so sorry, but it's Black History Month. Y'all give me some leeway. And so here we are. We drop into this conversation with the Lord between God and Moses. And in this conversation, Moses tries to get out of this calling. And I get it. He tries to get out of the calling. He tries to tell the Lord, listen, God, I hear you, but what if they don't believe me? Or what if they laugh and say, you crazy? You ain't been talking to God. You're a fool. And God says, here, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take your staff that's in your hand, throw it on the ground. Moses throws the staff on the ground and it turns into a snake. God says, don't be afraid. Pick the snake up by the tail. Moses picks it up. The minute that he touches the snake, it straightens up and turns back into a wooden staff. Moses says, yeah, I see that. That's cute. That's a cool trick, God. But what if they still don't believe me? God says, fine. Put your hand inside of your cloak. Moses puts his hand inside of his cloak. He says, take it out. When he takes it out, his hand has turned white. There's bumps and bruises and scars on it. And it looks like not the rest of his body, but just his hand has leprosy. Moses is afraid, but God says, don't you worry. Watch this. Put it back in your cloak. He puts it back in his cloak. When he takes it out, his hand has been restored. Moses says, I hear you, God. I see you. That was amazing, but what if they still... You know how hard it is to convince black folk of stuff. Have mercy, Lord. You know how difficult it is to convince black folk of stuff because After the Tuskegee experiment, it's hard to convince black folk of stuff. God, what if they still don't believe me? He says, that's fine. I want you to go and I want you to dip a cup into the river and bring it back and pour it on the ground. When you pour it on the ground, it's going to turn into blood. To symbolize the blood that was spilled of the children of Israel, he said, and if they don't believe you then, he said, I'll do some other things. Moses realizes now, I can't convince God to find somebody else by telling him by telling him that they won't believe me. And so Moses moves to another set of excuses. God, I can't talk that well. God, I have difficulty articulating myself. God, I'm slow to speak, and I can hear the words in my mind. I can formulate the ideas in my head, but somewhere there's a disconnect between my brain and my mouth, and ain't nobody gonna listen to me if I cannot articulate to them what you have told me to say. And God says, don't you worry about that. Your brother Aaron is on his way to see you, and Aaron is a smooth talker and a smooth walker, and I'll speak to you and you'll speak to Aaron, and Aaron will convey the message to the people. Can I pause for a second and tell you that I love how God does not take no for an answer. I love how no matter how many times we tell God, I don't think it's going to work. No matter how many times we tell God, I don't know if this is going to make it. God responds and has an answer for every excuse. And that is, to me, encouragement, because that means that if God has an answer to every excuse, then that tells me that God has already worked out my victory. Oh, but I'm going to mess around and start preaching a whole nother sermon. And so can I tell you that here's what I found most interesting. First of all, I found something interesting, that God will use a crutch to help you conquer. All right, what am I talking about? Moses is walking with a staff. He's using the staff as support and using the staff to help him walk. The staff is being used to aid him and to assist him with walking, to give him support so that if he can't sit down, he can lean on the staff and get a little bit of rest. If he has to climb up a small hill, he can use that staff and dig into the ground and pull himself up. Come on, somebody walk with me. We'll get there together. He pulls that staff to give him up. That staff gives him support. If he stubs his toe, he can change hands, and whichever side his foot may be ailing, he can use that crutch to give his foot some rest and to support his body. Normal, healthy men, young men, did not walk around at that time with staffs in their hand. No, staffs were reserved for the seniors and for the elders to give them assistance when they needed some to walk and to move. If he sat down, it was the staff that helped him get up. He did not have any chairs that tilted forward. No, if he sat down, that staff would help him get up. Wait for it. Not only that, but that staff was protection. If he found himself walking down a road and a wild animal came towards him, Moses could take that staff and swing it. And even if he didn't hit the animal, he could make enough noise with that staff to ward them off. But look what happens. Because if the enemy sees that crutch, the assumption is that you are weak. But God takes the crutch and tells Moses that the very thing that you are using to assist you, that may be a sign of a weakness, is what I'm going to use to deliver. Oh, I feel like preaching today. Is what I'm going to use to deliver you. What you talking about, Reverend? I need you to understand that there are some things in our lives that the enemy sees as a crutch. The enemy says that what I'm looking at is somebody who's been beaten down. What I'm looking at is somebody who's been weak. What I'm looking at is somebody who's been hurt. What I'm looking at is somebody who's been in pain. But can I help somebody today and let you know that God has the ability to use the very thing that you think is a crutch and help you conquer? Well, Reverend, make it plain. Some folk have a stigma about therapy. Some folk have a stigma about getting counseling. But can I help somebody today? While the society may look at it and say you going to a shrink, can I tell you that that just might be the place where God shows you how strong he is? I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. I don't want to look this way. I don't want to feel this way. Some of y'all walk around trying to make sure that you put on the appearance that everything is all right. You want to make sure that everybody looks at you and nobody can ask you if everything is all right. So you fake it until you make it. I know I did it too. My gout was acting up and I tried to walk into the church like I wasn't in excruciating pain. But y'all saw me last year. Finally, when I recognized that I could walk better if I put a boot on, I just dealt with the boot and walked. Why? Because I realized that the very same thing that appeared to be a crutch to me was going to help me conquer. And if I wanted my foot to heal and heal quickly, I needed to put something on it to make it better. So here it is. Moses has this crutch. That's what it was. The staff really was a crutch. It was something that aided him to walk, assisted him to stand up. It helped to defend him against wild attacks. That's what it was used for. And the very first thing that God does, the very first example that God gives, he uses the crutch and says, throw it on the ground. Pause. Let me show you how God uses what a crutch to make you a conqueror. He tells him to throw the crutch down on the ground. Watch this. Moses doesn't fall. Now, nowhere in the Bible, nowhere in the text, and I'm not adding anything to it, does it say that Moses had difficulty standing. But look what he does. If he did not need a staff to walk, he would not have had a staff to walk. Watch, God tells him, throw the staff on the ground. When the staff hits the ground, it turns into a stake, and without the staff, Moses, and I didn't make this up, that's what the Bible says, Moses runs away. I promise you, I did not make this up. The Bible says that when he puts the staff on the ground, he throws it on the ground, it became a snake, and he ran from it. That's what the text says. I promise you I didn't make it up. And so here's what I find so interesting about that. Moses probably doesn't even recognize his own strength because he has no idea that without the crutch, he has run from a snake. But wait for it. God says pick the snake back up. And without using the crutch to control the snake, Moses reaches his hand out, picks the snake up by the tail, and it turns back into the crutch. Can I add point 1A to this and tell somebody today that I need you to understand God will use your crutch to help you conquer by showing you that you don't need the crutch. My God. He'll show you that I can use your crutch to help you conquer. And when you're strong enough, you won't even realize that the crutch ain't there no more because I've given you the power. Now, I didn't tell nobody to stop taking your medicine. You keep taking your medicine, and if your therapist say take that medicine, you better keep taking that medicine. Don't you walk away talking about God said I'm a conqueror. No, take your medicine. All right, come on, let's move on to the next. Let's move on to the next point because I need you to understand something. God prepares for your plans. In the text, when Moses says that I cannot speak, the Lord gets mad with him and says, what about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. Watch this. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. So let me get this straight. Before Moses is able to give the excuse that I don't talk so good, God has already ordained it and sends Aaron to Moses. Moses doesn't know Aaron is on his way. God tells him that Aaron is coming to meet you, and if you fail, Aaron can assist you and succeed. Why? Because God prepares for your plans. Now, what you mean, Reverend? It seems like you have mixed up the pronouns. And so let me explain the pronouns to you. God prepares for your plans. God had already given Moses the plan. He had already given Moses the directions. He had already told Moses what he expected Moses to do. Now, Moses responds to God and tells God, I can't do it. They're not going to believe me. And then he says, and I can't talk well enough to get the plan into action, but it's already Moses' plan once God gives it to him. Can I pause for a second and tell you that the minute that God gives you instructions, it becomes your plan. The faster you take ownership of it, ma'am, sir, the faster you take ownership of it, the faster you can see it come to fruition. I don't know who needed to hear that today, but I promise you, walk with me. We'll get there together. There are some plans that God has given you, and you have not taken ownership of it. I promise you, I don't know who I'm talking to today, but there are some plans that God has given you, and you are still talking about, well, I don't know when God gonna do it. I'm just keep praying. I'm waiting for God to move. I'm waiting for God to show me something. Stop. When you might want to check your prayers and make sure that in your prayer text messages, you did not have a text from God that said, here's what you need to do. Go on and do it. Because some of us are afraid to move. So God tells us to do something. And just like Moses, we give pushback because we're afraid, because we're scared. But God, once he says it, it belongs to you now. And the faster you take ownership of those plans, the faster you can get to your victory, the faster you can get to your breakthrough, the faster you can get to your deliverance. Because let me share with you something. You can leave that message from God unread all you want. Once it hits your spiritual inbox, it's yours. At that point, God has already sent it to you, and you can sit there and look at the preview all you want and not open that message up. Come on, somebody. I know you did. You scrolling down, you see the preview, but just because you haven't opened it doesn't mean God doesn't have an expectation of you to handle it. And so when God tells Moses, regardless of what Moses' response is, God has already given Moses ownership of the plan, and now God can make preparations for the plan that belongs to Moses that has been sent and ordained by God. So, unbeknownst to Moses, God already knows that Moses is going to tell him that he doesn't talk so well and that he is not as eloquent. And so God starts Aaron on his way. And for whatever reason, God knows that Aaron is coming. And because he knows Aaron is coming, he is able to tell Moses, I knew you were going to say that. Guess who's on their way? Your brother is coming. Somebody you trust. Your brother is coming. Somebody you love. And I'm going to tell you what to to say. And you take all the time you need and tell Aaron what to say. And then Aaron is going to put it together all nice and plain for you, and he's going to tell the people. Isn't it great to know that God prepares for your plans? Isn't it great to know that when God tells you to do something, he's not leaving you hanging out there all by yourself? Isn't it amazing to know that God is not giving you a plan that he has not already thought out? That God is not asking you to do something that he has not already figured out? I'm so glad I serve a God that can see to the end of a thing, so that when we start at the beginning of the thing, God already knows how it's going to turn out. God already knows the problems I'm going to face. He already knows the trials I'm going to endure. He already knows the difficulty I may bear. But I'm so glad that if God already knows, that means that before the enemy can get to me, God already has a plan to deliver me. That before the devil can push me away, God already has a plan to buffet me. That lets me know that because God already knows what's going to happen, I don't have to be afraid of nobody, nothing. Why? Because anything that may do me harm, God has already planned for my breakthrough. God prepares for your plan. And so, as frustrated as Moses probably was at this point, no, he was thinking to himself, ain't no way I'm going to be able to get out of this now. Everything that I've told God, he has given me a response for. Everything that I told him I was going to do, God has come back with, well, I have to be honest, a very appropriate response. Can I tell somebody that's how it was when I received my call to preach? I tried to give God every alternative for my life. I tried to tell him what I was going to do and how I was going to appease him on one side and appease myself on the other. And God had a response for every plan I gave him. But I'm so glad that I finally took ownership of God's plan for my life, because things worked out much better. So here's the last thing, and we're going to go ahead and get ready for communion. Look what God says as Moses is walking away. They get to the end of the conversation. And there's something interesting about this particular verse. Something interesting about this particular verse is what I love about this verse, because I see two things in this verse. He says, but take this staff in your hand so you can perform signs with it. Now, here's the interesting thing. In verse 16, Moses, 15 and 16, Moses has told the Lord that I can't speak well, and I'm slow to speech, and I can't really articulate that well. And so Moses tells the Lord, I can't articulate that well. In verse 16, the Lord says, don't worry, Aaron is on his way to you. And when Aaron reaches you, he's going to be glad to see you. I'm going to put the words in Aaron's mouth, and he will speak for you, and as if you were God to him. And in verse 17, he says, but take this staff with you in your hands so that I can perform the signs with it. Here's something interesting. I didn't hear Moses agree to the plan. Come on, you can look back at it all you want. Look through verses 13 to 17. I didn't hear Moses say, okay, I'll do it. I'm not making this up. I promise you it's not in the text. You can read it backwards and forwards all day you want. At no point do I hear Moses say, you win, God, I'll do it. In 16, God explains to him how Moses and Aaron will operate. In verse 17, God says, but take this staff in your hand so that you can perform signs with it. What happens between 16 and 17, can I use my sanctified imagination to share with you that at some point when we are talking to God, God decides conversation over. At some point while we're talking to God, God recognizes in our spirit that we have no more comebacks. God recognizes that I done took all of your excuses away. I've shown you how I'm going to make things right. And so at this point, just do what I tell you to do so that we can hurry up and finish your victory. At some point, God says, I'm not arguing with you anymore. I'm not discussing this with you anymore. I've given you a commandment. I've given you a command. It's not a request. It's a command. And I need you to now do what I've told you to do. I've already promised you that I'm going to make a way out of no way. I've already promised you that signs and wonders are going to accompany the moment. I've already promised you that there will be victory after this. And at this point, God does not want to talk anymore about it. God says, enough talking about it. Let's be about it. But take this staff with you so that you can perform the signs with it. Watch this. I need you to understand that every proposition comes with provision. Every proposition comes with provision. God says to him, take this staff with you so that you can perform the signs with it. Now, listen to those words very carefully. He says, take this staff with you so that you can perform the signs with it. When God gives him the staff, or when God starts to perform signs with the staff, at the time, Moses believes that the only purpose for that staff at that moment is so that when he gets to the children of Israel and he goes to the Israelites and they do not believe him, he can do the tricks that God just showed him and throw the staff on the ground and it will become a snake. Pick it up by its tail, it'll turn back into a staff again. Moses has no idea how important that staff is going to be to him because he does not recognize or realize that when God makes the proposition, he sends him with the provision. I'm done. Share with you this story, and then I'm done. When I went to, very last time I went to Disney World, and we were in Disney, and I thought it was kind of interesting. I got on this one particular ride, and when I got on the ride, I would admit the ride was a little snug. It was a tad snug. In my head, I had reminded and remembered that I had 3 of the large turkey legs that week. I reminded myself that you have been eating and drinking everything that you've seen in these parks for the last 3 days, and here I am now getting into a ride, getting into the Hogwarts ride at Universal, and it's a little snug, it's a little tight. So the man comes by, he goes, don't worry about it, sir, go ahead, just pull down on it. I said, it's a little snug. He said, that's all right, you'll be fine, just pull down a little more. I said, it's a little tight. He said, don't worry, you're gonna need that. Pull down on it, and so I pulled down on it, and it was a little uncomfortable, but sure enough, as I begin the ride, and the ride starts moving, it becomes apparent in a few minutes why it needed to be a little snug and a little tight. Now, I had just gone on another ride the day before, soaring. It was a loose ride. I felt very comfortable in it. I could inhale and exhale comfortably, and my 3 huge turkey legs did not have any effect on that ride. But when I got on this ride, it was a little tight, it was a little snug, and when I pulled down the bar, I thought to myself, oh God, I'm not going to make it through the ride. Not because the ride was scary, but because I was going to pass out because I could not breathe. But as the ride began to move, I noticed and recognized now why this ride was more tight and more snug than the other ride. See, when I left the station with the snug ride, I did not know that I was going to make 360 loops and that I was going to at times be upside down. I did not know that there were going to be significant climbs and significant drops inside the building. Had no idea that my body needed to stay as perfectly still and as secure as possible because the ride itself was going to be one of jarring motions and jerking motions. But the tighter and the more secure I was in my seat, the less my body slammed into the sides of the seat and the less I would feel any pain or any jolt or any hurt. Now, in the ride yesterday, there was no jerking, there was no jolting, there were no extreme steep climbs and deep drops. I did not roll and do 360 rolls on that ride. That ride did not need to be as secure as the ride that I was on today, and it reminded me, one, because I really wish I could go back to Disney, but two, because I realize now that the protection I got and what I got at the station prepared me for what I was going to have to face when I got to the ride. Can I pause for a second and tell somebody that life is going to be a wild ride? We already know what happens later on in the story. We understand that Moses, while he thinks that his staff is simply going to be used to turn into a snake, and he pick it up and it turned back into a staff. We know that when God tells him to take that staff with him, there will come a moment when Moses slams that staff on the ground and the Red Sea parts. There will be a moment when God raises that staff in the air and tells Moses to lift that staff up. And when the staff lifts up, the people will move forward. There's going to come a time when that very same staff that Moses was using as a crutch is going to have to slam into the side of a rock, and out will come water for thirsty children of Israel. There will be a moment when God is going to say, take that staff and put it on the edge of the Jordan, and as soon as it hits the edge of the river, the waters will move forward. There's going to be a time when he's going to need to use that staff. And so while Moses thinks that he is only using the staff to get the children of Israel out of Egypt, he has no idea that with the proposition, God has already sent the provision. Can I help somebody today by letting you know that if God asked you to do it, then he'll equip you for it. That if God tells you to do it, that he'll give you what you need to get the job done. Every proposition comes with provision. And I know what you're saying. How's God going to help me? How's God going to deliver me? How's God going to bring me out? Well, my brothers and my sisters, look around, look around. God probably has already given you what you need to prevail. Every proposition comes with provision. I've learned now that every time God asks me to do something, every time God tells me to do something, every time God calls me to do something, every time God gives me directions, I may not know how I'm going to get it done, but I have learned not to doubt whether or not God will get it done. I don't need to know the how. I know the who. And because I know who asked, because I know who called me, I don't need to know how. With every proposition comes provision. And so, in this moment, God takes Moses and he has a show and tell session with him. And I'm so glad that God is not a God that he's too big to convince us that he's got us. Oh, come on, when you think about it, God doesn't owe us any explanations. God could very well just say to us, do it because I said so. But we serve a God who is not afraid to show and tell. He's not afraid to show us how he can deliver us, show us how he can make a way. But most importantly, he tells us, I've got your back. I am going to cover you. I'm going to deliver you. God bless you. Quite possibly you're watching this broadcast today. While you're watching this broadcast, you feel this tug, this pull on your heart. You feel this pull on your spirit, something telling you that I've been in those predicaments before. I've felt like I was out there by myself. Maybe you've had moments in your life when you had the same fear that Moses had before he made that first step. But I want to encourage you today, the only way for God to show and tell is for you to have a relationship with him. Yeah, see, God can't show you and tell you anything if you don't have a relationship with him. And the Bible says that the way to have a relationship with the Lord is through his son, Jesus Christ. And so if that's you today, if you are worshiping with us and you are looking for a closer relationship with God, we offer you salvation today. The only thing you have to do to accept him in your heart is to believe and confess. Confess with your mouth and believe in your heart and be saved. It's not very difficult. It's not very hard. And I wish I could tell you that the moment that it happens, everything in your life is going to be great. No, there are going to be moments and struggles, and you're going to have some difficult times, but isn't it good to know that now you are going through all of those difficult moments with the Lord on your side? In just a moment, there'll be a message that'll pop up in the chat. When it comes up, we invite you to click on that link if this invitation appeals to you. That link will take you to our inbox, and there you put your name, your address, and your telephone number so that I can reach out to you as soon as this broadcast is completed and pray the prayer of salvation with you. Quite possibly you are looking for a church home, a place to work out your soul's salvation. We're not a perfect church, but we're a church striving for perfection. And we're looking for good men and women just like you to help us advance the cause of the kingdom. Our church at this time is 100% remote, 100% virtual, but there's an opportunity for you to join us even now. Come join us, worship with us, especially if you've been worshiping with us online for the past few weeks. We invite you to come, just join us. Maybe you have a church home. Maybe you want to remain faithful and loyal to your church home, but you want to join us under what we call Watch Care. Watch Care is simply just a temporary membership that affords you the rights and privileges of a member of our church. And when the pandemic is over and you're able to go back to your church, we totally understand if you need to return to your home church. Be a pandemic partner with us. Share with us during the pandemic. Be covered during this pandemic, during this time when we are out of the church buildings. And again, when the pandemic is over, if you need to return to your church home, we totally understand. And we thank God for your presence while you're here. And so if either of those invitations appeal to you, we invite you to join us. Again, there's a link in the chat. You click on that link and it will open up our Facebook Messenger account. Write your name, your number, and your address there, and I'll reach out to you as soon as this broadcast is over. God bless you.